October 1978, the Ozark Mountains. A park ranger steps off the trail and notices something wrong. Total silence. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Then he sees a cabin that does not exist on any map. And the question is simple: who didn't want this place to be found? At first, the cabin looked harmless. Old wood, a sagging roof. But the ranger felt it immediately. This place wasn't abandoned. It was avoided. No animal tracks crossed the dirt around it. Not even insects touched the walls. The door was already cracked open, like someone expected him. And that's when he understood. This wasn't a forgotten cabin. It was a hidden one. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something honestly. Do you really want to know what was waiting inside that cabin? Because once you hear it, the woods will never feel peaceful again. This is Shadows of True History, a place for those who aren't afraid to face what was buried. If you're still here, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. You're part of this now. The cabin sat hidden among towering pines, its wooden frame warped by decades of neglect. The ranger, whose boots crunched softly against the pine needles, felt the air grow colder as he approached. It was as if the forest itself whispered warnings, urging him to turn back. The cabin's windows were cracked, blackened, and half covered in ivy, giving it the appearance of a hollow eye staring into the woods. Every instinct screamed that this place held secrets long buried, secrets the trees had silently guarded. As he circled the structure, his eyes caught faint markings carved into the doorway, symbols unfamiliar, jagged, almost primitive. The smell of damp wood mixed with the faint tang of something metallic, like rusted iron. He paused, placing his gloved hand on the doorframe, feeling a vibration, almost a heartbeat, as if the cabin itself were alive. A sudden gust rattled the loose shingles overhead, and for a moment he imagined hearing a whisper, a voice barely audible, saying, "Leave." Yet curiosity overpowered fear. He forced the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, revealing a small room frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light, and the faint outline of furniture suggested someone had abandoned this place in haste. On the floor lay a collection of items: an old journal, a cracked lantern, and a single small boot. This cabin, forgotten by everyone except the forest, had waited for him. And as he stepped inside, he could not shake the sense that he had crossed an invisible threshold, where the past and present might collide in ways he could never imagine. The cabin was only the beginning, a mere surface of the darkness lurking in the Ozarks. As the ranger flipped through the old journal, the names scrawled in trembling handwriting sent a chill down his spine. These weren't ordinary settlers or lost wanderers. They were figures once respected in their communities, people trusted by neighbors and lawmen alike. Yet the ink hinted at deeds the world would never have imagined, a hidden cruelty masked behind polite smiles and well-worn manners. He could almost picture them, men in stiff collars and women in plain dresses, walking through town with an air of normalcy, while in secret they orchestrated something far more sinister. Each entry revealed a pattern, a manipulation of townsfolk, the quiet disappearance of those who asked too many questions, and whispers of rituals that made the ranger's stomach churn. The deeper he read, the more he understood these antagonists thrived in plain sight, their power derived from the trust everyone placed in them. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees as if echoing the cries of victims long gone. The ranger felt a shiver race down his spine. He imagined confronting them, seeing their faces contort from civility to cold menace. And yet, he realized the true danger wasn't the fear of discovery, it was underestimating the depth of their cunning. Each carefully constructed lie, each well-hidden action was designed to ensnare anyone who dared pry into the truth. As night fell over the Ozarks, he felt the weight of history pressing down, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who wear familiar faces. And with that thought, the ranger knew he had crossed a line. There was no turning back now. The journal offered more than names. It revealed a carefully woven tapestry of deception. To the townsfolk, the cabin and its occupants were harmless, perhaps eccentric but respectable. Stories of simple folk living quietly in the woods kept suspicion at bay. They had built a reputation for charity, for hosting travelers and helping neighbors, and anyone who questioned them would be met with calm smiles and seemingly innocuous explanations. But beneath this benign facade lay meticulous planning. Every disappearance had a story, each misfortune given a rational explanation that silenced gossip and curiosity. Illness, misadventure, or simple wandering, these were the lies handed down to anyone who asked. The journal detailed the methods: subtle coercion, staged accidents, and calculated timing that left no trace. Even those closest to the family or group often couldn't piece together the puzzle. Their trust had been weaponized against them. The ranger traced the entries with a trembling finger, noting the irony that such evil had been hidden in plain sight. The cabin's decay mirrored the moral decay of its inhabitants. Their public persona was polished and tidy, but the truth was rotting beneath the surface. The deeper he read, the more he realized the cover story was a masterclass in manipulation. Every action, every word, every gesture was carefully designed to deflect suspicion and maintain control. By now, the forest around him seemed oppressive, almost complicit. The rustling leaves felt like whispers repeating the same lie over and over: all is normal, all is safe. But the ranger knew better. Behind the veneer of decency, the truth festered, an invisible force, patient, cunning, and deadly, waiting for the moment someone dared to uncover it. The cabin was only the tip of the iceberg. As the ranger explored further, the journal revealed an intricate network of hidden pathways, secret rooms, and concealed storage spaces scattered throughout the Ozarks. These weren't mere conveniences. They were part of a carefully constructed infrastructure designed to hide evidence, trap the unwary, and maintain control over anyone who ventured too close. He could almost see it: hidden compartments beneath floorboards, false walls behind bookshelves, and narrow tunnels leading to unknown destinations. Every corner of the land had been meticulously planned. The journal described locations where supplies were stored, where victims were moved unseen, and even places the locals would never think to search. The people behind this system had thought of everything, leaving trails that seemed natural, harmless, even coincidental. The ranger's mind raced as he pieced together the scale of the operation. What had begun as a solitary, forgotten cabin now appeared to be the central hub of something much larger, an organized web of secrecy and control. The deeper he went into the descriptions, the more the forest seemed to tighten around him, its shadows lengthening, its air growing heavier with the weight of past horrors. It wasn't just a place, it was a machine, perfectly engineered for hiding the unthinkable. And he knew, with a cold certainty, that uncovering one corner of it was only the beginning. There was a vast, hidden world behind these walls, and the ranger was about to walk straight into its center. The local authorities had long dismissed the strange happenings around the cabin as nothing more than the natural quirks of life in the Ozarks. Missing belongings, wild animals, faint cries in the night, the wind through the trees, strange markings on trees or walls, children playing tricks. Each explanation was carefully crafted, repeated often enough that even the most suspicious minds began to doubt themselves. The ranger felt a bitter anger as he read about the official reports. They were thorough in appearance but hollow in truth, designed to reassure townsfolk and maintain the illusion of safety. Every anomaly, every whispered rumor, had a logical-sounding reason, a story that silenced questions before they could gain momentum. Yet, the journal painted a very different picture, one of deliberate manipulation and silent terror. The authorities' solutions were not investigations, they were tools of deception, ensuring that the truth remained buried. He pictured the meetings, the notes filed away, the polite nods exchanged while the real horrors continued unnoticed. It was a masterclass in control. By providing a believable explanation, they turned curiosity into complacency, suspicion into disbelief. The ranger realized that uncovering the truth meant not just facing the cabin's horrors, but also navigating a system determined to erase them. Outside, the forest seemed to press closer, shadows growing longer, leaves whispering secrets the officials would never record. Every step he took into the cabin's mysteries brought him closer to understanding the depth of deceit. and the danger of exposing it. The line between what the world accepted as reality and what actually transpired had never felt so fragile. The journal introduced someone unexpected, a seemingly minor figure whose role at first glance appeared innocent, but the Rangers soon realized this person had been indispensable to the operation, the complicit collaborator. A caretaker, a messenger, a trusted neighbor, someone whose loyalty was quietly bought or coerced, someone who ensured the dark secrets of the cabin remained hidden. He pictured them moving silently through the forest, delivering supplies, watching arrivals, and reporting back to the orchestrators. Their presence had always been overlooked, their face blending into the crowd of ordinary townsfolk. Yet every entry in the journal highlighted their critical role, a shadowy thread connecting victims, perpetrators, and the official stories that masked the truth. Without them, the entire structure of secrecy might have collapsed. The Ranger's mind raced, imagining confrontations that never happened, the small acts of complicity that allowed horrors to continue unnoticed. How easy it was for an ordinary person to become part of something monstrous simply by turning a blind eye, offering small favors, or repeating the lies everyone else wanted to believe. Outside, the wind carried an eerie quiet, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. Every rustle of leaves reminded the Ranger that danger could lurk in plain sight, even in those trusted the most. The collaborators' loyalty was a chilling testament. Darkness often thrives not only in monsters but in those who willingly, quietly aid them. The journal did not merely list names, it breathed life into the victims. Each one had a story, a presence, a fragile thread connecting them to the world they would soon lose. Children with laughter that once echoed through the woods, women carrying burdens of quiet resilience, men whose lives were mapped by daily toil. They were ordinary people who stumbled into an extraordinary horror. The Ranger felt the weight of their absence, the emptiness left behind in the places they once inhabited. Descriptions painted faces etched with hope and vulnerability. The victims were not just statistics, they were living, breathing humans whose trust had been manipulated and broken. Some had wandered too close to the cabin, drawn by curiosity or necessity. Others were led deliberately, deceived by smiles and words that hid sinister intent. Every detail, what they wore, the scent of their hair, the tremor in their hands, made them painfully real, and the Ranger could not help but imagine their fear, the moments before understanding what awaited them. As he read, the forest seemed to react. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and a faint chill brushed his neck, like a warning whispered by the unseen. The victims' lives were the heartbeat of the story, the silent force driving the dark intentions of those who had preyed upon them. Understanding who they were, why they were chosen, and what they endured became the Ranger's obsession. He realized that to uncover the truth fully, he could not just investigate the cabin and its inhabitants. He had to honor the stories of those who never left. Each page he turned deepened his dread, yet also sharpened his resolve. The victims' voices, silent for decades, were calling through time, demanding to be heard, demanding justice. Not every truth remained hidden. The journal told of an accidental witness, a young hunter who had stumbled upon the cabin one late afternoon, long before the Ranger ever arrived. He had been following a deer trail, unaware that it would lead him to something far darker than the forest itself. At first, he thought it was merely an abandoned cabin, a curiosity for a passing moment. But the sounds he heard, the subtle movements in the shadows, quickly shattered any notion of innocence. Peering through a cracked window, he had glimpsed figures moving with deliberate purpose, shadows stretching unnaturally long under the fading light. He saw containers, bundles, and the unmistakable traces of fear etched into the quiet faces of captives. One of the perpetrators had caught his eye, a chilling stare that seemed to pierce the thin wooden wall separating observer from observed. The witness froze, every instinct screaming to run. Yet some part of him knew he could not unsee this. The journal described his flight into the woods, heart hammering, lungs burning, footsteps swallowed by leaves. Even in the safety of distance, the witness felt a cold hand of dread settle over him. He realized that knowledge came at a cost, Once you saw what lay within the cabin, your life could never return to its former simplicity. And yet, his discovery would become the first crack in a carefully constructed facade, the first spark of revelation that might one day expose the horrors the world refused to acknowledge. The forest around the Rangers seemed to echo that same danger, the sense that some eyes were always watching, that silence could be broken at any moment, and that curiosity could bring both illumination and peril. The accidental witness had survived, but only barely, and his story, like the journal itself, demanded that the truth not remain buried. The young hunter returned to town, his mind rattling with what he had seen. Days passed, yet sleep eluded him, replaced by relentless visions of shadowed figures, whispered commands, and the silent terror etched on the victims' faces. Friends and neighbors noticed the change. His once confident stride became hesitant, his eyes darted constantly, and he spoke less, afraid that even a whisper might summon unseen eyes. When he tried to recount his discovery, the townsfolk met him with disbelief, laughter, or polite dismissal. "You must have imagined it," they said. Authorities nodded in agreement, offering explanations that rang hollow even to their own ears. Old cabin tricks of the light, your imagination. The hunter felt the crushing weight of isolation. Even those he trusted seemed to conspire with the forest itself, denying the existence of horrors that had etched themselves into his memory. He was haunted not only by what he had witnessed, but by the realization that the world preferred ignorance. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of leaves, seemed amplified, a reminder that the cabin's secrets were far from contained. He began documenting what he saw, filling notebooks with details no one would read, photographs of objects long forgotten, sketches of symbols carved into wood. Yet with every page, he felt an invisible pressure, as though the darkness he had glimpsed sought to erase his testimony entirely. The ranger, reading these accounts decades later, understood the true cost of witnessing evil. The mind and spirit carry burdens others cannot comprehend. And in that understanding, he felt both fear and determination, fear of what the cabin still held, and determination to uncover the truth that the world had long refused to face. When the authorities finally stepped in, it was only after rumors had grown too persistent to ignore. A formal inquiry was launched, but it bore all the hallmarks of a perfunctory performance. Investigators arrived with clipped manners, their questions polite but shallow, their notebooks ready to record only what reinforced the official narrative. The ranger could almost hear the careful tone in which they reassured townsfolk. Nothing to worry about. Everything is under control. The journal revealed the subtle mechanisms of plausible deniability. Evidence was misfiled, reports sanitized, and witnesses coached to forget inconvenient details. The perpetrators had anticipated this scrutiny, leaving behind traces that could be explained away as coincidence, accident, or superstition. Each investigative step was anticipated, each question anticipated, and every move designed to maintain a veneer of normalcy. It was not negligence, it was strategy. The system itself had been manipulated to protect the guilty. The accidental witnesses' accounts were noted but dismissed as exaggeration or nervous imagination. Every photograph, sketch, or note he produced was met with skepticism, a gentle nod that masked indifference, or worse, complicity. The cabin's horrors were obscured by a fog of bureaucracy, by the socially sanctioned authority of men in positions of trust. For the ranger, reading these pages decades later, it was infuriating and illuminating. Evil had been enabled not only by its architects but by the very structures meant to stop it. And in this revelation, he recognized the courage it would take to peel back the layers of deception and expose the truth that had been deliberately concealed. The journal spoke of those who survived, but survived was a fragile word. The victims who emerged from the cabin were changed, their bodies and minds scarred by what they had endured. Faces that once held warmth now seemed hollow, eyes clouded with a lingering terror that no comfort could erase. Even decades later, the remnants of their suffering echoed in every gesture, every hesitant word, and every haunted glance. The ranger imagined their return to the world outside the forest. Simple tasks became monumental struggles, trust was shattered, replaced by hyper-vigilance. Families tried to offer solace, yet these survivors carried memories no one else could fully comprehend. Their altered state served as living proof of the horrors inflicted, evidence that was undeniable yet too disturbing for the authorities to confront. Each survivor bore the weight of the cabin's secrets in their very flesh and psyche. He noted how the journal described subtle changes. Some walked with a cautious, measured step, as though expecting danger at every turn. Others shied from social interaction, haunted by memories that refused to fade. The psychological imprint was as profound as any physical injury, a testament to the calculated cruelty of those who had orchestrated the cabin's dark events. For the ranger, these accounts were both chilling and motivating. To uncover the truth, he realized, meant listening to these silent testimonies, interpreting the unspoken language of trauma, and piecing together a reality the world had chosen to ignore. The victims, altered though they were, remained the clearest window into the horrors that had unfolded, and the only path to exposing them. The journal described in painstaking detail the methods behind the horrors. It was a chilling calculus, a perverse science applied with cold precision. Nothing was left to chance. Timing, placement, and psychological manipulation were all orchestrated to achieve maximum control. The perpetrators treated their dark acts like experiments, observing reactions, recording outcomes, and adjusting techniques with clinical detachment. The ranger read of the systematic nature of it all. Victims were isolated, studied, and maneuvered like pieces on a chessboard. Notes outlined how fear was cultivated, how trust was broken in subtle ways, and how the environment itself was manipulated to heighten anxiety. Doors creaked just so, shadows were allowed to stretch unnaturally long, and sounds were strategically timed to unnerve those trapped inside. Every detail had been engineered to extract terror and obedience. Even more disturbing was the attention to documentation. Symbols, schedules, and coded entries suggested that this was not only about control but about legacy, the perpetrators meticulously recording their methods as if proud of a cruel craft. The forest, the cabin, the isolated hills, they were all part of a laboratory designed to observe human behavior under extreme duress. For the ranger, the implications were staggering. This was not random cruelty. This was calculated, deliberate, and frighteningly organized. Every decision had a purpose, every detail an intent. And as he traced the methodology, he understood that unraveling the mystery would demand more than courage. It would require a mind capable of anticipating the perpetrator's next move before they could act again. Amid the shadows of the cabin and the meticulously documented horrors, the journal introduced someone who dared to challenge it all. A hero, flawed but relentless, drawn to the truth by personal stakes and an unshakable sense of justice. Unlike ordinary investigators or curious townsfolk, he possessed a combination of intuition, courage, and a refusal to accept convenient lies. The ranger could almost feel his presence, steady yet wary, moving through the forest with purpose. The hero was not perfect. The journal described moments of hesitation, fear, and doubt. He carried the burden of past failures, personal loss, and a quiet desperation that made his mission both noble and perilous. Yet it was precisely these imperfections that made him human, relatable, and capable of navigating the treacherous web the cabin's inhabitants had spun. His determination was fueled not just by curiosity, but by an understanding of what could be lost if he failed. The lives of the victims, the truth itself, and the fragile thread connecting justice to memory. The forest seemed almost to recognize him, its shadows shifting as he moved, revealing hidden paths and secret corners. Every step was deliberate, every decision weighed with the knowledge that discovery could be fatal. He observed, he documented, he listened, and slowly, piece by piece, the intricate, horrifying puzzle began to reveal itself. For the ranger, reading this decades later, the hero's courage was palpable. It was a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, one determined individual could shine a light on secrets long hidden. The story was no longer about fear alone. It was about the pursuit of truth, the refusal to be silenced, and the first sparks of hope in a tale otherwise consumed by shadows. The hero's approach was methodical, careful, and terrifyingly intimate. He did not charge blindly into the darkness. Instead, he embedded himself within the very fabric of the operation, observing unnoticed, learning the patterns of the perpetrators, and gathering evidence piece by piece. Every creak of the cabin floor, every whisper through the forest, became a clue, a piece of a puzzle that demanded patience and precision. He took careful notes, sketched maps, and memorized hidden compartments and escape routes. The journal described his nights spent crouched in shadows, listening to conversations meant for nobody else's ears. Each observation carried risk, each decision a gamble. One wrong move could mean discovery, and discovery meant death. The hero's mind was always alert, analyzing, anticipating, piecing together the interconnected network of secrets, lies, and fear that had enabled decades of terror. Yet he remained human, vulnerable to the psychological weight of what he witnessed. Moments of doubt, nausea, and fear threatened to derail him, but he pressed on, driven by the faces of the victims, the stories that demanded acknowledgement, and the certainty that justice required exposure. He understood that infiltrating the darkness required becoming part of it, without losing himself entirely. For the ranger reading decades later, this section of the journal was a revelation. The hero was not a myth or a distant figure. He was real, calculating, and deeply human. His courage, intellect, and empathy created a bridge between the hidden horrors of the cabin and the world outside. A bridge that the ranger knew he must now follow. Now, I want you to pause and really picture this: a lone hero, crouched in shadows, documenting horrors no one else dares to confront. Every sound of the forest feels amplified. The snap of a twig, the whisper of leaves, the subtle groan of the old cabin settling around him. Can you feel the tension? The weight of history pressing down, demanding attention. This is where the story turns truly chilling. What the hero uncovers is not just a crime, but a methodical, calculated darkness, hidden in plain sight for decades. And here's the question I want you to hold on to. If someone had not dared to investigate, would these truths have remained buried forever? I need you to commit, to step closer into the story. Comment your thoughts, your location, and your theory below. Join the investigation. Share this with someone who can handle the truth. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Shadows of True History. This is the point where curiosity becomes courage, where witnesses transform into storytellers, and where you watching now take part in uncovering the secrets long concealed. The forest is silent again, but only for a moment. Beyond the shadows, the next revelations wait, darker and more unsettling than anything we've encountered so far. Can you handle what comes next? The hero's patience finally paid off. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the cabin, he discovered documents, photographs, and objects that left no room for doubt. Proof of the sinister operations that had long been whispered about but never proven. Each item was a testament to meticulous planning, coded journals, maps marking hidden roads through the woods, and letters detailing transactions and instructions. The hero realized the scale of the crime went far beyond the cabin itself. Every document told a story of manipulation, of trust betrayed and lives stolen, names of victims, dates of disappearances, and instructions for keeping the horrors hidden were all there, carefully cataloged. It was as if the perpetrators had documented their own legacy of terror, unaware that someone would eventually decode it. The photographs, faded but clear, showed the victims and their altered appearances, proof that survival came at unimaginable cost. The hero's hands shook as he examined each piece, feeling the weight of history pressing down. He knew this evidence would be explosive, capable of exposing decades of deception, but also dangerous. In the wrong hands, or if discovered too soon, it could provoke retaliation. Yet he pressed on, understanding that truth demanded risk. For the ranger, reading decades later, the discovery was the story's pivot point. The cabin was no longer just a place of whispered horrors. It had become the epicenter of undeniable truth, a revelation that would shake the Ozarks and challenge every carefully maintained lie. No sooner had the hero gathered the evidence than the air shifted. A sudden creak from above, the snap of a branch outside. The perpetrators knew he had discovered too much. Panic surged, but training and instinct kept him focused. The forest, once a labyrinth of shadows, became both alley and threat. Every step had to be calculated. Every rustle might reveal his location. He navigated narrow trails, vaulting over fallen logs, ducking beneath low, hanging branches, the weight of the documents pressing against his chest. Behind him, the faint sound of pursuit grew, a hurried shuffle, a low murmur of anger, and the unmistakable crack of a branch snapped underfoot. Fear twisted in his stomach, but he pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that the truth depended on him reaching safety. Moments stretched like hours. The wood seemed alive, branches clawing at his jacket, shadows stretching impossibly long. One misstep could end everything. Yet the hero relied on his preparation, the sketches and notes memorized during his infiltration, leading him to a hidden path that even the perpetrators had overlooked. By the time he emerged into the faint light of a clearing, lungs burning, clothes torn, he knew he had survived, but narrowly. The evidence was intact, and the chase had left him more determined than ever. For the ranger reading decades later, the sequence was electrifying: danger, cunning, and the unyielding drive to bring the darkness to light. This was the turning point, the moment the unseen became visible, and the shadowed truth could no longer remain buried. The hero stumbled into the nearest town, evidence clutched tightly, heart still pounding from the relentless pursuit. At first, relief washed over him. He was back among people, visible and safe, or so he thought. But the town streets, quiet and sunlit, betrayed a chilling indifference. Authorities received him politely, nodding at his claims, yet their eyes carried a subtle dismissal, a carefully measured skepticism that left him questioning whether his journey had been in vain. He presented the documents, photographs, and journals, each piece meticulously detailing the atrocities committed in the cabin. Yet the officials' responses were methodical, designed to contain rather than confront. "We'll look into it," they said, their voices calm, almost soothing. The hero felt a wave of frustration and disbelief. After surviving the forest, the cabin, and the pursuit, he now faced an even more insidious obstacle: disbelief from those entrusted with justice. Despite their resistance, the townsfolk could not entirely ignore the truth. Whispers began to circulate, curiosity mixed with fear. Yet even as suspicion grew, the hero realized that exposing the cabin's secrets would require more than evidence. It demanded persistence, cunning, and courage to navigate a society that preferred comfort over confrontation. The ranger, reading decades later, sensed the bitter reversal. The hero had survived physical danger only to face the quiet, suffocating challenge of convincing civilization itself. The truth had been uncovered, but now it had to fight for recognition. The battle was far from over, and every step forward required resilience, ingenuity, and unyielding resolve. Authorities finally mobilized, spurred by the undeniable evidence the hero had delivered. But nothing could have prepared them, or the ranger reading decades later, for what awaited inside the cabin. The forest seemed to recoil as the raid unfolded, the trees standing as silent witnesses to decades of concealed horror. Doors were forced open, floorboards pried up, and hidden compartments revealed, each layer peeling back more of the darkness that had festered unseen. Inside, the chamber of horrors stretched beyond imagination. Rusted tools, cryptic symbols etched into walls, and remnants of the victims' lives bore witness to atrocities meticulously concealed. Faded photographs and journals chronicled terror, fear, and manipulation, leaving little room for denial. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the cold tang of iron, a physical reminder of what had transpired. Investigators recoiled, their professional detachment failing under the weight of the macabre scene. The hero walked through it all, steady yet shaken, as decades of deception, cruelty, and manipulation finally lay exposed. Each corner told a story, each object a silent scream, and every shadow seemed to remember the suffering it had witnessed. The cabin was no longer a forgotten structure in the woods. It was a testament, a shrine to both the victims and the horrors that had been allowed to thrive in obscurity. For the ranger, the raid illuminated the calculated scale of evil, the careful orchestration, and the unimaginable resilience of the hero who had endured pursuit and disbelief. The darkness had been unveiled, but its echoes would linger forever, a haunting reminder of the truths the world often prefers to ignore. The raid left no room for illusion. The perpetrators, once respected and trusted by their community, were revealed in their true forms. Cold, calculating, and disturbingly methodical. Faces that had once smiled politely in town meetings now appeared haunted by arrogance and detachment, expressions frozen in shock, rage, or feigned ignorance. The hero watched as masks of civility fell away, exposing the chilling reality behind decades of deception. The journal provided insight into their psychology, a meticulous obsession with control, an ability to manipulate both human behavior and institutional structures, and a complete disregard for the suffering inflicted. They had cultivated trust to hide malice, using the town's faith as both shield and camouflage. Every action had been deliberate, every lie calculated to protect their empire of fear. As authorities confronted them, the villagers' initial disbelief gave way to horror. Whispers spread, revealing the depth of the betrayal. These were neighbors, friends, mentors, ordinary people capable of extraordinary cruelty. The hero observed each villain's response, noting the faint cracks in their composure, the subtle flickers of fear as the full scope of exposure became undeniable. For the ranger reading decades later, this unmasking was crucial. It confirmed the human capacity for both deception and evil, while also affirming the hero's bravery and persistence. Evil had thrived in plain sight, but now finally it had been named, revealed, and stripped of its comfortable disguise. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that the cabin's horrors were not isolated. The hero uncovered correspondence, shipping records, and coded journals that hinted at a broader network, stretching beyond the Ozarks. What had begun as a local conspiracy now revealed connections to distant towns, even other countries, suggesting a calculated international web of complicity and exploitation. The ranger could almost see the map unfolding: hidden routes, clandestine meetings, and the movement of resources and people that allowed the crimes to persist undetected. The scale was staggering. Decades of meticulous planning, coordinated across borders, with participants who relied on secrecy, intimidation, and trust among themselves to remain invisible to outsiders. Every letter, ledger entry, and photograph confirmed that the cabin was a hub, not a solitary den, and that its perpetrators had allies far beyond the local forest. The human cost was immense. Victims had been trafficked, manipulated, or used as pawns in a system that spanned continents. The journal chronicled names, dates, and locations, each a thread in a dark tapestry that had been hidden from public scrutiny for decades. Authorities and townsfolk alike had seen only the surface, unaware of the depth and reach of the crimes. For the ranger, this revelation was both horrifying and compelling. The story had grown from a single forgotten cabin into a sprawling conspiracy, proving that evil, when orchestrated with intelligence and patience, could escape notice for decades. And yet, with the hero's evidence, the hidden network's influence began to unravel, exposing a shadowy world previously thought untouchable. Even with evidence in hand, the true challenge was confronting society itself. The journal detailed how communities, institutions, and media outlets had colluded, consciously or through willful ignorance, to bury the truth. Fear, convenience, and the desire to maintain appearances allowed decades of horror to remain hidden. People turned away from whispers, dismissed anomalies, and repeated the convenient lies that kept the cabin's secrets intact. The ranger could almost hear the hushed conversations, the polite nods, and the averted eyes. Knowledge came at a price, and many preferred safety over confrontation. Even those who suspected something dark often chose silence, rationalizing complicity with phrases like, "It's none of my business," or "better not to interfere." This conspiracy of silence had allowed the perpetrators to operate with impunity, their darkness reinforced by the quiet compliance of the world around them. The hero, navigating this social landscape, realized that exposing the truth required more than evidence. It required persistence, courage, and the ability to challenge societal norms that favored comfort over justice. Every witness brought forward, every document revealed, was a step against the tide of denial and apathy. For the ranger, the lesson was clear. Evil is not only in the acts themselves, but also in the culture that permits them to flourish unchecked. The story was no longer just about a cabin or its horrors. It was about the collective choices of a society willing to look away, and the small number of brave individuals willing to demand accountability. The investigation ultimately caught up with the key players, and the consequences were as varied as they were revealing. Some perpetrators faced the law, their meticulously constructed lives unraveling under scrutiny. Courtrooms echoed with testimony evidence and the undeniable truth, stripping away decades of polite pretense. Yet even justice was imperfect. A few managed to evade full accountability, hidden behind sympathetic lawyers, bureaucratic loopholes, or fading memories. The complicit collaborators met mixed fates. Some faced legal consequences, while others faded quietly into obscurity, burdened with guilt or haunted by fear. The accidental witness, long tormented by the weight of knowledge, finally found a measure of peace, though the images and memories would never fully fade. Each individual's outcome reflected a mix of human frailty, societal failure, and the relentless pursuit of truth by the hero who refused to be silenced. For the Ranger reading decades later, these resolutions underscored the complexity of justice. Evil had been confronted, but not eradicated. The world was capable of both accountability and neglect, reward and oversight, closure and lingering uncertainty. The hero's courage had shifted the balance, but the aftermath reminded him, and us, that the shadows always linger, even after light reaches them. Through it all, the cabin remained a silent witness, its walls absorbing the echoes of judgment, fear, and revelation. And the Ranger understood that some lessons, like the ones learned in the forest, where enduring accountability is rarely absolute, but courage can tip the scales. The cabin, the forest, and the horrors within left a legacy that stretched far beyond the Ozarks. The story was no longer just about a single place or its perpetrators. It was a cautionary tale about the fragility of trust, the ease with which evil can hide in plain sight, and the vital importance of vigilance. The Ranger reflected on the lessons embedded in the journal Bravery Matters, Truth Matters, and even the smallest acts of courage can unravel decades of deception. The victim's memories, once suppressed, became a silent force driving awareness and education. Communities began to reckon with their own complicity, however passive, learning that ignoring the signs of darkness allows it to flourish. The hero's perseverance became a benchmark for future investigators, a testament to the fact that persistence, intelligence, and empathy can pierce even the thickest veil of secrecy. The moral was unflinching. Evil rarely announces itself. It thrives in the gaps between curiosity and complacency, in the spaces where society chooses comfort over confrontation. The cabin stood as a monument, both literal and symbolic, a reminder that vigilance, courage, and moral clarity are the keys to preventing history from repeating itself. For the Ranger, decades later, the story's resonance was deeply personal. The forest whispered lessons of responsibility and courage, a haunting reminder that history's shadows are always watching, and that every individual has a role in confronting them. Now I want you to imagine standing at the edge of that forest, feeling the chill in the air, knowing the cabin's secrets lie just beyond the trees. Could something like this happen today? Would we even recognize it if it did? The shadows have a way of hiding in plain sight, and only the brave, or the curious, dare to uncover them. The hero's journey, the victim's stories, the hidden network, and the societal silence all remind us that history is never truly buried. It waits for someone to listen, someone to act, someone to shine a light into the corners others prefer to ignore. And this is where you come in. Share your thoughts, your location, your theories below. Subscribe to Shadows of True History to join the investigation, to confront the secrets the world fears, and to witness stories that will haunt you long after the forest goes silent. And before you go, remember this: the next story is even darker, even more unsettling, and it's waiting just around the corner. If you think you've seen the limits of human deception, think again. Keep watching, because the shadows are never done speaking.